For years, the name Jasmine Crockett stood for something powerful. She was bold, fearless, a voice in the storm. She called out injustice in packed town halls. She marched alongside veterans, held their hands, looked them in the eye, and promised that no soldier who served this country would ever sleep on the street again. To many, she wasn't just a congresswoman. She was hope in human form. The daughter of a working-class nurse raised in the South, Jasmine built her reputation as a fighter. She didn't come from money. She didn't come from connections. But she had a gift, the power to speak truth to power and to do it with fire. C-SPAN clips of her fiery speeches racked up millions of views. Young activists shared her quotes. Elderly veterans sent her letters. She was called the new voice of conscience in Congress. She wore that title like armor, and the people followed her into battle. But what happens when the hero they believed in becomes the very threat they feared most? The room had gone quiet, cameras focused. Journalists put down their pens, and there stood Jasmine Crockett. Under the bright lights of the House chamber, she raised her hand, paused just long enough for silence to settle, then spoke. If we can fund war, then we can fund warriors. If we can build bombs, we can build homes. No man or woman who served this country should ever beg for a roof, a blanket, or dignity. The applause thundered. Even her critics couldn't deny the power of that moment. She continued, veterans don't need our pity. They need our promises kept. And I will fight to make sure that no hero ever sleeps on concrete in the land they risked everything to protect. It was the kind of speech that echoed, that traveled through headlines, social media feeds, and Sunday morning talk shows. People cried, veterans cheered, and Jasmine, she walked off the podium as if carrying the weight of every folded flag. But as history would show, words are easy to deliver, promises are harder to keep. Her words lit a fire, but it wasn't just applause that followed. It was trust. People who had been ignored for decades suddenly believed again. One point, Brigadier Frank Delaney, 7-year Vietnam veteran. Frank had lost part of his leg to a landmine outside Da Nang. He lived alone in a trailer outside El Paso, surviving on disability checks and canned food. When Jasmine spoke, he watched on a tiny TV with a bent antenna. He leaned forward, his tears in his eyes. That woman, she gets it, he whispered. For the first time in years, someone's fighting for us. Frank sent $15 from his meager savings to Jasmine's re-election fund. He didn't have much, but he believed. 1.32 Linda Myers, 38, war widow. Her husband, Sergeant Anthony Myers, was killed by an IED in Kabul. She had 2 kids and a mortgage she couldn't handle alone. The grant Jasmine proposed, affordable housing for veteran families, gave Linda hope she hadn't felt in years. She testified at a rally. When Jasmine Crockett speaks, I hear strength. She talks like someone who's lived what we've lived. She doesn't just care. She understands. Linda joined Crockett's grassroots volunteer team, not because she needed politics, but because she needed healing. 1.3 point through Jason Kim, 20-year Marine amputee. Jason lost both legs in a roadside blast in Kandahar. The day he left the VA hospital, he was wheeled out onto the sidewalk. No ramp, no ride, just a discharge form and silence. When he heard Jasmine speak, he found something rare: rage turned into resolve. He posted her clip with the caption, "Finally, a politician who doesn't look through us." Jason became the face of Jasmine's campaign on TikTok, filming videos from his wheelchair, urging veterans to stand behind someone who finally stood up for them. They believed in her not because she was perfect. They believed in her because she made them feel seen. And that is what made the betrayal so devastating. It became more than a speech. It became a slogan, a rallying cry, a national promise. No one gets left behind. Those 5 words echoed far beyond the marble walls of Congress. They were printed on flyers, carved into banners, woven into hashtags. Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak them, she branded them into the public imagination. Veterans believed, families believed, America believed. A local news crew once followed Jasmine as she toured a halfway home for veterans recovering from PTSD. She stood outside the front door, surrounded by former soldiers in faded uniforms and hopeful eyes. She looked straight into the camera and said, "They left blood on foreign soil. They lost friends, limbs, memories. What they should never lose is our commitment. This country owes them more than medals. It owes them dignity." It was a moment that felt presidential. People whispered she could go all the way. Polls rose, donations surged. Her message resonated across age, race, and politics. And always those 5 words repeated, no one gets left behind. But behind every promise is a test. And when the moment came for Jasmine Crockett to prove she meant those words, it wasn't her voice America heard. It was the silence of broken trust. It was supposed to break ground in the spring. The ribbon-cutting ceremony had already been planned. Dozens of veterans had packed their belongings ready to move into their first real homes in years. But spring came, and nothing happened. Frank Delaney waited by his trailer with a folded flag and a box of dishes. Linda Myers kept her kids out of school for a week, expecting a call that never came. Jason Kim had a friend drive him 4 hours to what he thought would be his new apartment. All they found was an empty lot. No workers, no construction equipment. Just a faded sign that read, Veterans Housing Initiative, coming soon. It had been coming soon for 7 months. When reporters asked Jasmine's office, the answers were vague. There are supply chain delays. We're revising blueprints to be more energy efficient. Unexpected zoning issues. No one could show permits. No one could name a contractor. No one could explain where the $12 million already allocated had gone. People started asking questions, and Jasmine, she stopped answering them. This wasn't just a delay. It was the first crack in something much bigger. And those who had once believed now began to wonder, did we make a mistake? They didn't come forward at first. Most veterans are trained to endure, to stay silent, to not complain, but silence has a breaking point. And when the project never launched, their stories began to surface. Frank Delaney was the first. A local journalist found him sleeping in a rusted-out pickup truck behind a gas station in El Paso. Wrapped in a military-issued blanket, he whispered through cracked lips, "They told me the house would be ready by May, so I left my trailer, sold it. I didn't think I'd still be living like this in November." He hadn't bathed in weeks. His left leg stump was infected, and yet he still had Jasmine's campaign sticker on the side of his truck. She said, "No one gets left behind," he muttered. Guess I was the exception. Then came Maria Torres, widow of Sergeant Luis Torres. She and her 9-year-old daughter had been living in a church basement. Her voice cracked as she spoke into a local radio mic. "We packed up everything. We had nothing left in Houston. Jasmine said we'd have a place." My little girl cried herself to sleep for weeks. More names followed, more voices, and one painful sentence kept repeating across news stations and forums. We believed her. What began as hope was turning into something darker. At first, the media gave her space. After all, Jasmine Crockett had been a darling of the progressive press. She was young, bold, articulate, and more importantly, she made great headlines. But the silence from her office became too loud to ignore. A local reporter from the El Paso Times ran a story titled "No Homes, No Answers, No Apologies." It quoted Frank Delaney's case and ended with one simple question. Where is the money? Soon national outlets picked up the thread. NBC, CNN, even independent watchdog blogs, each one echoing the same concern: 42 million allocated, 12 million dispersed, 0 homes built, and Jasmine. She stopped holding press briefings. Her social media team turned off comments. Voicemails at her office were auto-deleted. Her last appearance was a 3-minute clip at a ribbon cutting for a solar panel project, not veteran housing. When chased down in a hallway by a reporter from the Hill, she smiled tightly and said, "We're working on it. There are bureaucratic delays. I'm proud of the progress we've made." Then she walked away. But by now the narrative was slipping out of her control. People didn't want reassurances. They wanted accountability. And the harder Jasmine tried to stay silent, the louder the truth began to shout. It started with a quiet conversation in a church basement. 3 veterans, 3 folding chairs, 1 battered notebook passed between trembling hands. "I don't know where the money went," Frank Delaney said, "but I know we didn't get it." Linda Myers added, "I've called her office every week. They hang up now." Jason Kim, staring down at his wheelchair, just nodded. That night, they wrote a letter. It wasn't angry. It was desperate. "We are 167 veterans and family members. We believe the promises, we gave our trust. Now we ask, where is the help we were promised?" The letter was passed around by hand from shelter to shelter, clinic to clinic. Some signed with trembling fingers. Some added military photos folded into the envelope. All carried pain. All carried hope that someone would listen. When the letter reached the Veterans Accountability Committee, it came with 167 names, ranks, and service records. Not usernames, not hashtags, real people, real wounds, real betrayal. The committee opened an inquiry. News outlets ran the headline, 167 Betrayed Veteran Sign, Formal Complaint Against Rep. Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine's office released a two-line statement. We are aware of the concerns raised. We remain committed to transparency, but no interviews, no apologies, no answers. And for those 167, that silence hurt more than the lie. While the headlines were still burning and the silence from Jasmine's office echoed louder than ever, another woman stepped forward. Pam Bondi, former Attorney General of Florida, known for her icy composure, fierce cross-examinations, and her unwillingness to back down from a fight. This wasn't her first time in the fire, but it might be her most important one yet. She had once gone head-to-head with Wall Street executives, had taken on pharmaceutical giants, and even stood her ground before presidents and cameras without flinching. Pam didn't care about politics. She cared about proof. She didn't chase spotlights, but now the spotlight was chasing her. When the 1167 signature letter hit the Veterans Accountability Committee, Pam was tapped to serve as special counsel. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't post on social media. She didn't make a speech. She opened a folder, and she started reading. If there's truth in this story, she told her team quietly, he'll find it. And if there's fraud, he'll prove it. That day, she requested access to over 4,000 pages of financial records. Behind closed doors, the work had begun. And somewhere across the city, Jasmine Crockett had no idea the storm was coming. There were no flashing cameras, no podium, no headlines. Just silence in a small office with a locked filing cabinet. This was how Pam Bondi worked. She started by mapping every dollar promised to the housing initiative, who approved it, when it was moved, and where it actually went. And almost immediately, something didn't add up. The first $5 million was listed under a construction firm that no longer existed. Invoices had matching totals but different serial codes. Receipts dated months before a single brick had ever been laid. And one signature, the same one, kept appearing on documents supposedly signed by different people. Pam didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She did what lawyers do best. She highlighted, she circled, she waited. By day 12, she had flagged 31 anomalies. By day 17, 12 subpoenas had been prepared. By day 22, her team cross-referenced every page of Jasmine's public statements with the internal documents they now had. I'm not interested in rumors, Pam told her assistant one night. I'm interested in records that lie. In people who pretend they don't know. The truth never screams. It leaks one line in a ledger, one signature, too many, one transfer to a company that shouldn't exist. Pam Bondi's office unearthed the first clear trace, a wire transfer of $850,000 to an LLC registered in Delaware. The name Civic Revival Holdings, a company with no website, no listed board, and one listed address, a UPS drop box. 3 more LLCs followed, each receiving large sums within hours of each other, all with patriotic names, all recently formed, all connected to the same email address. And then the signatures. Pam cross-referenced 49 documents and found a stunning pattern. 3 different people, 3 different roles, but one identical signature. It wasn't just lazy fraud. It was coordinated forgery. And then came the kicker. One of the payment authorizations was digitally signed from an IP address linked to a city government office, a floor Jasmine Crockett had previously worked on. They didn't hide it well, Pam muttered. They just assumed no one would look. Pam Bondi didn't go to the press. She didn't call a press conference. She didn't scream corruption. She turned up the heat 1 degree at a time. First, she released one bank statement, then one anonymous LLC, then one signature mismatch. No names, no accusations, just breadcrumbs. And the city hall flinched. Council members who once shrugged off the scandal started skipping interviews. The housing board's lawyer issued a sudden statement. Please direct all inquiries to the ethics office. But it wasn't the leaks that broke them. It was the waiting. Every Monday at 9 a.m. a new file appeared online. No commentary, no explanation. Just a PDF with highlighted text. Week 2, a document showing Jasmine Co. signed a payment. Week 3, an email showing her assistant was copied on an LLC formation. Week 4, a calendar entry lunch with the man behind Civic Revival Holdings. And still, no one from Bondi's team spoke. Not a word, not a tweet, not even a whisper. Just the sound of water boiling and the frogs still sitting in the pot. The room was silent, except for the click of cameras and the hum of a nation holding its breath. Pam Bondi stepped up to the microphone. She wasn't angry. She wasn't triumphant. She looked tired. Not weak, just tired of lies. Behind her, a screen lit up. A simple file appeared. No flashing headline. Just exhibit a disbursement summary, Civic Revival Housing Project. Someone shifted in their seat. A news anchor in the back whispered, "She's really doing it." Pam looked directly at the chairman. "I ask that this document be entered into public record." Then she clicked. Names, amounts, accounts. Her voice didn't rise, but the room did. Gasps, murmurs. A pen dropped. A woman in the third row began to cry. One entry read $7,400 wired to Civic Futures LLC signed by JC. Another $15,000 outreach budget redirected to a private account. Same initials. The committee didn't ask questions. Not yet. They just stared at the screen and at Jasmine Crockett, whose face had gone still. The room dimmed. A video began to play. No music, no edits, just a man in uniform. "My name is Sergeant William Hayes. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I'm 67 years old, and I believed in Jasmine Crockett." His voice shook slightly. He sat in what looked like a modest living room. An American flag hung behind him. His hands trembled, folded on his lap. "When the Civic Revival Housing Project came to our town, we thought finally someone sees us." He reached beside him, pulled up a manila folder. The same kind Pam had shown. His thumb traced one line on a page. "This says I received $3,200 in assistance. I never saw a dime." He looked straight at the camera. "But I did sign a sheet. They said it was attendance. Now I see my name on a disbursement file." His voice cracked. "I fought for this country. I buried friends in Kabul. And I thought I thought she was different." He lowered his gaze. Silence. One sentence faded in white over the black screen. "We believed in her until we couldn't." Pam Bondi stepped back to the microphone. She didn't need to shout. The documents did the talking. She held up one slide, a transfer confirmation. $200,000 wired from the Veteran Community Assistance Fund. Destination Regrowth Civic Outreach LLC, registered only 18 months ago. No office, no staff, no website. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a nonprofit. This is a mailbox. Another slide. Funds from Regrowth were split. A trail of transfers to 3 shell companies, each one with matching addresses in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. Then came the gut punch. Final destination, Pam clicked. A 6-Porter-M oceanfront property in the Hamptons. Owner of record Delphina Harrow. A former Crockett aide, a name that had appeared 47 times in Jasmine's campaign logs. The room was dead silent. Even the committee members looked down. This wasn't just sloppy paperwork, Pam said. This was extraction, laundering, abuse. The headline wrote itself, "Veteran Funds Became a Beach Mansion." It was just one name, but it shattered everything. Congresswoman Crockett, a Republican voice, leaned in from the panel. "Have you ever heard the name Delphina Harrow?" For a second, Jasmine blinked, not the defiant blink of a fighter, but the frozen, startled look of someone just recognizing a ghost. Her lips parted. No words came out. The room waited, and the camera zoomed in, a slight tremor in her left eyebrow. A micro-flinch. Her fingers gripped the wood of the desk just tight enough for the veins to show. Pam didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The silence was doing all the damage. That name, Jasmine finally whispered, does not relate to any financial misconduct, but the voice pressed again. "She bought a mansion with money that originated in your former AIDS fund trail." Jasmine's face turned, anger, shame, grief, all rising at once and in full view of a nation watching live. The image went viral in minutes. A single screenshot, Jasmine eyes, glistening lips, trembling, a flicker of fury flickering through disbelief. And in that frame, America didn't just see a congresswoman. They saw a woman cracking on the record in real time with nowhere to hide. No one expected the email. Even fewer expected the sender. She was soft-spoken, late 50s, a former grant officer, and until now, utterly invisible. But the email she handed Congress, it had one sentence highlighted in red focus on appeasing donors. "Veterans can wait. Internal Memo Office of Outreach, 2022. I couldn't stay silent anymore," the woman said under oath. "We were told to delay benefits, stall phone calls, and bury applications that weren't strategically valuable." The room froze. Veterans sat in the back row. One stood up. His hands trembled. Another whispered, "That's what they told my wife too. Just wait. Just wait." Meanwhile, the projector screen behind the whistleblower lit up a series of emails, instructions, and Slack messages, all with one theme: donor satisfaction. Veteran urgency. The cold efficiency of it was inhuman. Jasmine sat forward, not to speak, just to listen, and her jaw clenched tighter with each slide, until the final one. Subject priority list. Q4, platinum donors first, political allies second, public service cases last. The silence was no longer political, it was personal, and for millions of families watching at home, many of whom had waited years for veteran benefits, it felt like someone had finally read aloud the lie they had long suspected was true. The public was still reeling from the whistleblower's email when the spending records dropped, and they dropped like a bomb. One document marked internal not for distribution listed over 120 expenditures flagged by the Inspector General. From 2021 to 2024, $312,000 for a veteran outreach summit held at a luxury Dubai resort. 1 expenditures wired for temporary housing later revealed to be a penthouse in Manhattan, $480,000. In consulting tied to a private yacht retreat off the Amalfi Coast, $86,000 spent on commemorative watches for executive staff. And that was just the first 10 pages. The chairman of the subcommittee looked up. "Let me be clear," he said. "These are funds earmarked for veterans, not your next vacation." The gallery erupted, not in noise but in stunned, seething silence. Across the country, veterans tuned in from their phones, VFW Hall's hospital beds. Some had waited 13 months for dental care. Others had fought for reimbursement on prosthetics and lost. Now they watched as slides flashed Dubai beaches, Manhattan skylines, white yachts under the Italian sun. Then came the kicker: trip justification, team building, staff cohesion, cultural exploration. One vet tweeted, "Spent 9 months homeless while waiting for my VA case." They were in Dubai, team building. It went viral. This wasn't mismanagement. It was betrayal gift wrapped in invoices. And for the first time in years, Americans weren't just angry. They were done. The committee chair had just slammed the gavel down, calling for a full audit, when another document hit the screen. This time it was personal. A scanned PDF of an internal email. Subject line: reallocation request, Y 2023, QU priority clearance sent from jcrockethouse.gov, date April 11th, 2020, time 9:42 p.m. Recipient: acting budget officer, Office of Veteran Affairs. It was short, just 3 lines. Reviewed and approved for priority allocation. Expedite implementation under discretionary category C. Jasmine B. Crockett. The committee room froze. No noise, no gasps, just the sound of scrolling paper and widening eyes. It didn't matter that the phrase category C was vague, or that the email lacked attached justification. What mattered was the signature and the implication that Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman who had just denounced the spending, approved it. The headlines wrote themselves: Crockett greenlit Dubai funds, discretionary C email ignites firestorm, 2.4 million linked to single signature. Within minutes, pundits on cable news were foaming at the mouth. She signed it. She knew she's finished. But the truth was messier than the headline, because an audit revealed something else. That Jasmine's inbox had been accessed remotely from an IP in Georgetown, at a time when Jasmine was on a red-eye to Texas speaking at a veterans hospital, and the signature digitally embedded. No two-step verification, no encryption log. In the digital age, fraud doesn't look like a break-in. It looks like a perfectly timed reply. The email had barely hit the evening news when the streets began to fill. First a handful of veterans outside the Capitol, then dozens, then hundreds. By the next morning, it was thousands. They carried signs: 42 $42 for homes not mansions, veterans don't wait, politicians do, Crockett lied, soldiers cried. On Twitter, a single hashtag exploded, #justice 447. Within 24 hours, it had been used over 2.3 million times. Clips of the hearing, Jasmine's frozen face, Pam's cold evidence were replayed, remixed, turned into viral sound bites. At a rally in Dallas, a war widow spoke through tears. "My husband gave his life for this country. They told me the fund would help us. Instead, it bought someone a penthouse. Tell me who's the real hero here." The crowd erupted in chants, "Answer us, answer us." Meanwhile, at town halls, Jasmine's allies tried to speak, but they were drowned out by boos, by shouts of shame. Some were forced to cancel appearances. Even donors began to retreat, worried their names would be linked to scandal. The pressure was no longer political. It was cultural. It was moral. America wasn't just asking questions anymore. It was demanding answers, and it was demanding them now. The courthouse smelled of old wood and iron. Every creak of the benches seemed louder that morning. Because this time, the gallery wasn't filled with reporters. It was filled with veterans, men in wheelchairs, women in faded service uniforms, young soldiers with prosthetic limbs, elderly men with trembling hands clutching folded flags. Every row was packed, not a single empty seat. When the judge entered the room, didn't just rise, it rose as one body, a sea of veterans standing together, some saluting, others holding back tears. Pam Bondi adjusted her papers, but for once she didn't need to speak yet. The presence in that room was already an unspoken testimony. Even the jury stole glances at the gallery. And Jasmine, she looked for the first time not like a congresswoman, but like a defendant staring into the eyes of those she had promised to serve. The judge's gavel came down. This court is now in session, but the truth was clear before a word of evidence was read. The people most betrayed were finally face to face with the woman accused of betraying them. And in that silence, the weight of their presence was heavier than any document, any headline, any lawyer's argument. The projector dimmed. The last spreadsheet faded from the screen, yellow highlights burning in everyone's memory. Pam Bondi closed her folder. Then she leaned forward, eyes locked on Jasmine. Her voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. Congresswoman Crockett, these funds were meant for housing veterans. Instead, they bought penthouses, vacations, yachts. Every slide we saw today was a roof that never went up, a bed that was never built, a family that slept in their car. She let the silence hang. Not a cough, not a whisper. Then Pam's tone sharpened. So I'll ask you here under oath and before every man and woman in this room, will you return every misappropriated dollar to the veterans you swore to protect? The air cracked like glass. Jasmine shifted in her chair. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically. But the cameras had already zoomed in, capturing every flicker of hesitation on her face. The judge looked down. The gallery leaned forward. Veterans in wheelchairs and prosthetics in faded uniforms, all holding their breath. Jasmine's lips parted. Her voice was low, brittle. I will comply with all lawful directives. Pam didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply replied, I'll take that as a no. The gavel struck, but the silence that followed was louder than thunder. The question still echoed in the chamber. Pam's words lingered like smoke. Will you return every dollar? But Jasmine said nothing. She shifted once, then froze, her jaw clenched. Her eyes darted not to her lawyer, not to the judge, but to the rows of veterans staring back at her. And then silence. No rebuttal, no denial, no righteous anger. Just silence. The cameras zoomed in. Every network, every live stream, every phone in the gallery locked onto her face. The sweat on her temple, the tremor in her lips, the glassy stare that refused to meet the crowd. On social media, the clip spread instantly. The caption wrote itself the moment she had no answer. In that silence, a career cracked, and a country understood. Sometimes guilt doesn't scream. It sits in silence. The silence had already become unbearable. But then it broke. A single tear slid down Jasmine Crockett's cheek. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't staged. It was raw. The kind of tear that tells the world the weight is too heavy to carry. The cameras caught it, every angle, every network. The tear was replayed more times than her words. The veterans in the gallery didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just stared stone-faced because no tear could pay back what was lost. Pam Bondi didn't move, didn't speak. She simply closed her folder like a soldier lowering a flag after battle. And then the sound that sealed the day. Bang, the judge's gavel struck. This session is adjourned. The echo rang through the chamber. Heavy, final, and for everyone watching inside and outside the courtroom, it wasn't just the end of a hearing. It was the sound of a fall from grace. The tear, the silence, the gavel, it all carried beyond the courtroom. By the next morning, the headlines were merciless. Crockett silent. Crockett falls. 167 veterans betrayed. House Ethics Committee strips Crockett of committee seat. Within 48 hours, Jasmine Crockett's political empire collapsed. Her leadership roles revoked. Her campaign staff began to resign. Donors pulled funding, and her approval rating plummeted by 31% overnight. Cable news showed the same clip on repeat. Jasmine silent. Then Jasmine crying, no words, no defense. Commentators called it the most devastating silence in modern politics. But worse was still to come. That afternoon, the Department of Justice announced a federal investigation. Wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit embezzlement. The words carried heavier weight than any soundbite. These were not just scandals, they were felonies. Outside crowds of veterans and citizens gathered again. But this time the signs were different. Investigate now. Prison, not politics. Justice for 167. For Jasmine Crockett, it was no longer about her seat in Congress. It was about survival. Because the halls of power she once ruled had now become the walls closing in. The scandal had shaken Washington, but on the ground far from the headlines, it was the veterans who carried the weight. Communities rose up to help. Churches opened their doors. Local businesses donated food and supplies. Volunteers built temporary housing for families who had been left stranded. Across small towns and big cities, Americans came together. Because when government failed, the people refused to. At one shelter in Texas, a retired Marine whispered, "The community showed up. They gave us blankets, meals, even a roof. But trust doesn't come back so easy." His words hung heavy. Yes, veterans were fed. Yes, they were sheltered. But the promise that the nation would always have their back, that promise had been shattered. On talk shows, pundits debated corruption. But in living rooms across America, veterans quietly wondered, if they could steal from us, what does that say about the system we fought to defend? The support was real, the compassion was real. But so was the wound, and it wasn't one a check, a blanket, or a hot meal could heal. The hearings were over, the trials were underway. But Pam Bondi knew the fight wasn't finished. Standing before a group of veterans and reporters, she spoke not as a prosecutor, but as a voice of warning and of hope. Her words were steady, measured, every syllable carrying the weight of months of testimony. Justice, she began, is not about revenge. It's not about humiliating one person or ending one career. She paused, scanning the faces before her. Justice is about making sure this never happens again, that no veteran, no widow, no family who has sacrificed is ever treated as expendable. Justice is not vengeance. Justice is prevention. The crowd was silent, but their silence was not empty. It was agreement. It was resolve. Some nodded, others wept quietly. And for the first time since the scandal broke, there was something in the air beyond anger, a fragile but real sense of healing. Pam closed her folder, looked at the veterans, and ended with a promise. You were not forgotten. And you never will be. The scandal was more than numbers, more than fraud. It was a mirror reflecting what happens when power grows unchecked and when promises to the most vulnerable are broken. As the credits of this story roll in your mind, remember this. Never close your eyes when power crushes trust, because silence is the soil where corruption grows, and vigilance is the only shield against betrayal. For every veteran left behind, for every family who waited for help that never came, justice came too late, but it still came. The lesson is not just theirs, it belongs to us all. So when you see injustice, when you hear the faint crack of promises breaking, don't look away. Stand, speak, demand, because history has proven the moment we close our eyes is the moment we give permission for betrayal to happen again. And here on Mr. Fact Story, we promise you this: we will keep telling the stories that others want buried. Because truth, no matter how painful, is the first step toward justice. This story isn't just about one politician's fall. It's about us, about how fragile trust can be and how easily silence can turn into betrayal. The lesson is simple but powerful. Never take promises at face value. Always ask, always check, always hold those in power accountable. Because justice doesn't begin in the courtroom, it begins with ordinary people refusing to look away. If this story moved you, if you believe the truth should never be buried, then join us. Hit the subscribe button. Turn on the notification bell. Share this video so more people can see what really matters. Here on Mr. Fact Story, we tell the stories others are too afraid to tell. Stay with us, because together we can make sure no voice and no truth is ever forgotten.